GoldenEye 007 has returned to a Nintendo console after 26 long years. This game's aged ways might perturb those with more modern gaming sensibilities, but in this video, we will analyze several control options to find the optimal input method to play this beloved boomer shooter on Nintendo Switch. Thanks for coming, and hopefully you too will master this lower poly soldier spy with our GoldenEye controller guide. First, let me explain how the game's controls work with the most natural example possible, an N64 controller. Alongside the launch of select Nintendo 64 games on the Nintendo Switch Online service, a compatible Nintendo 64 controller was sold separately. With this, you can play GoldenEye 007 as originally intended, but that original intention is still kinda confusing. Designing a first-person shooter for a console back in the 90s was uncharted waters.
One of the things about GoldenEye which is aged quite badly is the control method. Believe you me, we tried every control method.
And when that console you developed your game for had a trident for a controller, you could say Rareware was selling headlong into the Bermuda Triangle. They knew the controls would be a problem, and thus there are tons of options and 8 different layouts to choose from in the game's menu. 1.1 Honey is the standard option. It lets you move with the analog stick, and that's crucial because that allows for 360 degrees of directional input. Your up-down camera controls and the infamous strafe are on both the D-pad and C buttons. You pick which handle you want to hold. I don't discriminate. Aim is set to the bumpers, and firing your gun is set to the Z trigger, which is sick, bro. Best thing about the N64 controller, by far. Anyway, the other actions are on A and B. 1.2 Solitaire is similar, but switches movement to the D-pad and C buttons, and analog stick now controls the camera. This method nearly simulates the arrangement of modern controllers, with movement on the upper left stick and camera on the lower right stick. However, the left analog stick is just a D-pad here. This being the case, your movement is restricted to the 8 directional inputs of a D-pad. 1.3 Kissy is like Honey when it comes to movement. It alters some things slightly, like weapon cycling is moved to the bumpers, aiming to the triggers, which in turn kicks the fire button to A, which is not kosher. I'm sorry, just not a Kissy guy. I don't know what to tell you. Anyway, 1.4 Goodnight is to Solitaire, as Kissy is to Honey, which... what? Confused yet? Just wait. I'm a 1.1 Honey guy myself when it comes to the classic N64 controller, but everything you know about controlling a console FPS since Halo 1 needs to be thrown out to get a feel for this game. But if you're not one of the lucky few who could buy this thing during its limited availability, all these tips are terribly unhelpful because it's sold out for you. So moving on to option 2, we have the Pro Controller. Getting other controllers involved is always messy, and the N64 app on NSO has no options for button mapping. You have to perform them on a system level in the settings. Nintendo's default mapping is odd and often not ideal. Since we are playing with a modern controller, Solitaire has many advantages, as it'll feel more normal than any other option. Problem is the default controls get mapped in a way that puts camera control on left stick, movement on right, and you'll look like this. So quit out. Go into settings. In controllers and sensors, you want to select change button mapping. In here, there's a setting that will switch the left and right sticks. Thanks to Reddit user QSport77 for the tip, they suggest a few other tweaks. Moving B to L and A to R moves weapon switching and action to the bumpers. Setting L to ZL and ZL to ZR moves aim to the left trigger and shooting to the right. Now you get all your controls on the top of the controller outside of movement and camera, which are remapped to their familiar positions on the sticks. Be sure to save this configuration before leaving the menu so you can reload it in an instant. This setup is really intuitive and feels almost modern. However, you are stuck with the limited 8 directional inputs of the D-pad. The developers of Rareware knew this limitation though, and they devised a
horrifying solution.
Yes, there was a dual analog solution back on the N64. It's called using 2 controllers to get 2 analog sticks. 2.1 Plenty is quite the handful. Almost as much as a handful as Galore, Domino, and Goodhead. With these styles, you can get full analog control for both movement and the camera. You could tell Rareware was willing to try anything and everything. And to their credit, the N64's middle analog stick prong thing makes this probably the only feasible controller you could comfortably hold 2 of. It's not likely for you to have one of these new N64 controllers, let alone 2, but if you do, try it out. Couldn't hurt, just don't do it in public. Wait a second. Holding 2 controllers comfortably at the same time? That's right! If you use the two Joy-Cons as separate individual controllers, you know, the awful on-the-side configuration you use exclusively on planes with that special person in your life that is willing to play Mario Kart and nothing else and only in this situation, then you too can take advantage of this method. It's really quite simple to reconfigure a pair of Joy-Cons for GoldenEye dual analog play. Just follow these steps very carefully. Starting with the left con, we need to get it from horizontal to vertical. In change button mapping, you want to select control stick settings. In here, you'll want the second option to change the stick orientation. This will verticalize the Joy-Con's analog stick. Now, the remapping process. Buckle up. First, change ZL to SL, SL to ZL. Change up to right, left to up, right to down, and down to left. Be sure to save the rebinding before leaving. Now the right. Change its orientation. Move ZR to SL, R to SR, X to Y, A to X, B to A, Y to B, SR to R, SL to ZR, and don't forget to save this one too, and you're done! Simple, right? Thanks Nintendo, you really made this one easy on us. With that, you'll be able to play dual analog GoldenEye 007 on the Nintendo Switch with just two Joy-Cons. The one major problem with this method? You have to use Joy-Cons! Gross! I tried a lot of other controllers for this video, even the GameCube controller, using the adapter. Unfortunately, the GameCube controller and most every other option are considered third-party or USB controllers and cannot be remapped on the system menu. Without remapping certain eccentric 64 buttons to a proper place, many of these controllers don't fully work right, which is a shame. So what do I recommend? Well, if you want that old school, unnecessarily difficult and obtuse experience that was gaming in the late 90s, rebinding those Joy-Con will be harder than any secret mission this game could throw at you. However, the Pro controller plays well with the solitaire rebind, with the caveat of limited directional inputs for movement in that mode. That option should work for most people though. But if you are willing to empty your mind and wallet for one of the classic N64 controllers, and embrace that learning curve, that's the way to go. And after that, with your preferred method chosen, you can take it online and test it against other James Bondses in a 2 to 4 player battle royale, because that's what they called it back then.